Well, this is kind of a sideways response to that question. I felt that one of the major problems of CSDE was that we didn't have a large funded projects of which there were multiple collaborators on.
Mhm.
I think that many of the other centers, they would have these large projects, and a number of the PIs or co-PIs were all working together in collaborative research. And this was true both most of the universities I had been affiliated with. And we didn't have one. Everybody did sort of their own thing. And so I thought that the one way to do this would be to create a collaborative research project of data collection that would get a lot of people involved in that, and everybody could take the data and do their own scholarship based upon it. So I think this was actually after I was center director, but I think it evolved over this course of this period of time, was to think about a project, a survey of some sort. And one of the projects that that other places had done was surveys of high school students. Bill Sewell he was not a demographer, but he was a professor at the University of Wisconsin. And he had found a survey conducted of Wisconsin high school graduates in 1957. And he followed them up over the course of their lives, and other people have as well. They, follow them all the way through retirement. It was a longitudinal study using demographic techniques, but sociological and psychological and all sorts of gerontological theories to be able to test ideas. And I thought Seattle would be an ideal location for something like this because it was different from all the other studies that have been done. We were a multi-ethnic, diverse community on the West Coast. The other studies that have been done locally, they were primarily sort of, Wisconsin, kind of a white, Scandinavian origin population, relatively homogeneous. There had been other national surveys done comparing Black and white high school students and their subsequent careers, but there was nothing that represented this wide panorama of substantial Asian communities from all different communities, a Native American community, a Hispanic community, a small but very vibrant African American community as well. So Bob Plotnick, I think he was the director at the time, we got a grant and we had a year-long weekly seminar. And everybody participated trying to think of what was their idea. And the problem is everybody had an idea, but it was their pet idea. There wasn't really coming anything together. And after about a year of everybody talking about it and going off in all their directions, I realized this was not going to happen unless somebody took charge. And I was of the mind saying, okay, well, nobody else is going to do it. I will go ahead and do it. So I applied and got a grant from the Mellon Foundation to start what became the University of Washington High School and Beyond project. This was in the early 2000s. And I put in about 5 co-investigators. Everybody was Bob Plotnick, Dick Morrill from geography. Trying to remember, I think we had about 5 or 6 co-investigators. And we selected a site in Tacoma. And so we interviewed all high school seniors in Tacoma. And we're going to follow them up a year later. Because of funding opportunities, we wound up expanding the study to other school districts and including private schools, and it eventually became about a 5-year project of data collection. And I published a book that came out in 2016, and there are probably a couple of dozen articles. I think the website's still available somewhere. The problem was, instead of trying to link all these different people together, it became more and more my project, which I did, and I had a number of other people who were involved with it. Gunnar Omgren, social work, was probably my closest colleague during this time period. Everybody else worked on it for a while, as long as they were getting funding, but then they had other interests that they wanted to pursue, and they sort of went off on other tangents, and not as many people wanted to utilize the data. So I think that was my major contribution to trying to create a research community. I think it was successful, and it became fodder for many graduate students and postdocs to do their research. We developed a lot of research ties. Quite a few students used the data for their PhD doctoral dissertations, but it didn't become institutionalized. It didn't, there was no successor for me being the project director of the program. And right now, most people think, oh, isn't that the project that Charlie organized a number of years ago? It was. I was hoping it was going to, take off like some of the other major research projects that define population centers around the country. But that's where that is.
Yeah, that's right. When I was director, the Battelle folks were involved, and then it grew beyond me, beyond Battelle. I think Shelley probably had a role to play in that, and I realize now that you're affiliates from literally all over the place, and that was another way I think having the center become part of arts and sciences as opposed to sociology could intellectually expand. Um, One of the internal events that mattered, and I'm not sure if Adrian would mention this, is that's about the time the Center on Statistics and Social Sciences got started, thanks to Adrian's initiative and some university funding. So the two centers, CSSS and CSD, made a nice pairing. And we could point to them as a major resource when we were looking for center funding and training funding. So that internally, I think, was a big impact that was outside the center. Nationally, I mean, we all remember 911, those of us of a certain age. And I don't remember much of it. I mean, that it had any direct impact on what we did. It may have affected some foreign travel that didn't happen. I don't know. Yeah, the only thing I remember explicitly was one person we wanted to bring in was Iranian, and he couldn't get a visa the first year, but he got a visa the second year. But it was after 911, but we were nonetheless able, with State Department permission, to bring in quite a few fellows from Muslim countries. We had Sudanese, we had this one Iranian, we had um, several folks from Pakistan, and it wasn't a problem. It wasn't the problem that it became in later years in our politics.
Yeah, I think they have probably a better idea about that because they're all longstanding Seattle residents. So you can imagine when I got here, I'm thrown into writing the center grant proposal and then thrown into the CFAS proposal. And honestly, I was lucky to know my way home, right? That said, what was clearly happening was Seattle was growing in size and national profile during this time. Microsoft was well established, but Amazon was just taking off. And the Gates Foundation was just being established. So it was kind of a feeling of growth and possibility. And some of the negative side effects, like the housing problems and the traffic, were not a big deal back then. It still felt like a city that was really livable and at least somewhat affordable. Nationally, I mean, the thing that I was most focused on was this was a big time for funded research, and NIH went through a period where they called it their doubling period, where the research budget doubled in size. Mm-hmm. And we hit them at that point. So it was a good time it was a lucky time in some ways to be doing institution building because there was a fair amount of support for that.
Yeah, what was happening? Well, I mean, the big event was it's hard not to think about the Great Recession and coming along. And it was an example in contradistinction to what's happening now of the ways in which the state can provide awesome support at particular moments and how it leads to these explosion of scientific potential. And that's what happened. It wasn't a Sputnik moment or a World War II moment, but it certainly had this huge push associated with it. It created opportunities. It wasn't just we had money to hire people, we had all this research money that we could dole out at the time. So that was a big, big thing for me. I think it would have been really grim without it at the time. I can't, I mean, regionally, I mean, it was, again, it was the state. I mean, it's not just the federal government, but also the understanding state government and trying to reach out to the state and winning out in some cases, getting money from the Office of Financial Management and learning about, from that, learning that what they did. I wasn't fully aware of it, but I became aware of it. Got money to create the RDC from them for the first 2 years. Um, but understanding what they did in terms of population projections. And Adrian Raftery filled me in that they had taken over something that CSD used to do and that we'd lost. And now Sarah has led an effort to kind of recreate those connections. And I think that is really, really good. But it was really, really hard to sustain that without to stay. So they really wanted support from us, and it was really hard to reciprocate the money that they gave us. And I regret that. So that was an important thing at the time. And I'm glad it's kind of flourished since, to a certain extent. Other things going on. I can't really think of anything kind of locally. I mean, the regional affiliate thing is important. Uh, not that I didn't know this. You discover geography really is important here. We are kind of alone out here as a big research institution in the Northwest, and so looking for kind of regional affiliates, both for the center, but also for kind of support for the research data center from. We just don't have big institutions around us. We are the only real game in town. And you have to go at least 200 miles to find another big institution or something like that. And it's kind of hard to then build alliances with other institutions that might benefit from your support. So that was painful. um, Should have been obvious, but it wasn't.